Hi, everyone. I'm Toni Pace Karstensen. I'm chair of the VES Vision Committee. And on behalf of the VES, I would like to welcome you to today's event. And first of all, there are a number of people we need to thank for making this event possible. I'd like to thank our host, which is ICT. They have been amazing. And in particular, there's a team at ICT, Paul Debevec, Mark Bolas, David Nelson, Kathleen Haas, Christina Trejo, Rob Groom. Please, thank you all for being an amazing team to work with. I'd also like to thank Mike Chambers, who's chair of the VES, and Eric Roth, who is our executive director, for their unwavering support of the VES Vision Committee. I'd also like to thank our VES team, Jeff Casper, Ben Schneider, Colleen Kelly, Brent Armstrong, and Jennifer, Jennifer Cabrizi. She's wonderful. They have been incredibly helpful. I want also to thank John Root. John, where are you? This is John Root. John Root is the person who suggested almost a year ago that we do a light field imaging event. So John is with VRLA, and I really want to thank John for suggesting it because it was a great idea. I'd also like to thank our volunteers. First of all, I would like to thank Art Durinsky, who did this amazing artwork. I'd like to thank Jill Smolin, Joan Collins, Amit Shamblev, Trinell Bland, Lisa Atkinson, and Katie Brillhart, who has been taking pictures for us, as well as Lisa. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Scott Squires. Scott Squires is a Technical Academy Award winner. He is also a VES Fellow, recently honored by the Society. He has been very active on the Vision Committee and has been active in visual effects for many years. Please join me in welcoming Scott Squires. Scott Squires.
Thank you. We have a great show for you tonight. The speakers all have fantastic stuff, and we are very fortunate. We've got 4 of the leading experts in the light field industry and research. So what we're going to do is each speaker will get up and speak for approximately 25 minutes. We'll have about 5 minutes of questions for that speaker at the end of their talk. And after all 4 speakers have finished, we'll get up here, we'll gather them all up in front here, and I'll be asking them some questions, and we'll also open up again to the audience for additional questions and so forth. So for our first speaker is Paul Debevec. Paul is let me make sure I've got the official title here correct. So I'm sure everybody here knows Paul, but he's the Chief Visual Officer of USC Institute of Creative Technologies. And without any further ado, you're up, Paul. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about light fields for virtual reality, which is a really exciting thing. And Scott and Tony asked if maybe I could try to do a little bit of basic explanation, because for some of us, have not been working with light fields for the last 20 years or so. And to understand light fields, I think it's helpful to go back to a sort of earlier concept to hit the computer graphics research area, which is the Plenoptic function. There was this paper in 1991 by Adelson and Bergen. Ted Adelson's a professor at MIT, super smart guy. And they were talking about how you could represent all light in space, in a volume, as a 5-dimensional function called the Plenoptic function. Plen, like plentiful, optic, like optics, and so the full optics thing. And they actually found a reference to this kind of thinking that dated back pretty far, even back to Leonardo da Vinci, where he talked about a pencil of rays, like all of the rays incident upon a point, like you see right here. So it's kind of like a panorama. and how basically space is full of all of these pencils of rays, and that they pass through each other and they don't interfere with each other and all of that. That you can represent, anything you could possibly see here. And then he developed the concept of the pinhole camera, the camera obscura, and cutting a hole in a building and seeing the other building projected across the way as a way of selecting a pencil of these rays. And with that analysis, you actually get this five-dimensional function. So any particular panorama that you shoot is a 2D, unwrapped image. You can parameterize it as theta and phi, like azimuth and inclination. And then it was taken at some XYZ point in space. And nowadays, actually, it's pretty easy to take panoramas thanks to fun little things like the Rico theta. Right here. Who has a Rico theta, by the way? Excellent. Greg Downing's one of those guys, and that's ours in the lab, and this is Greg's here. And so they're pretty fun because they've got two fisheye lenses, and they actually overlap considerably. This is the same duct on the ceiling here and here. You can see how much overlap they have, and because of that, they can stitch them together very successfully. And you can get a really nice seamed thing. There's Rob Groom over there as we're shooting it this afternoon. So as long as you're like, a foot away from the thing, you get something pretty good. And this is essentially a way of taking every possible photograph that you could, as long as it's from that same point of view. And if you take a look here, here's a panorama shot earlier here. And look, we have control. Everyone's done this kind of thing before. But basically, any focal length, any zoom that you might want, you can get. There we go. Hi there. Hello, everyone. There, people are milling in. All of the photos were taken because we've taken this full two-dimensional slice of the Plenoptic function. Now, that doesn't give you everything that you need to know in order to move the point of view. So if this were in VR, you could do it like as a flat panorama around you, but you vexingly wouldn't get 3D from your two eyes. And even worse, you wouldn't be able to move your head around and be able to see all the motion parallax. And it turns out that's an incredibly important cue, because if you show somebody a stereo panorama, which you might get by seaming together two different points of view for this, you're kind of telling your binocular stereo that the scene is 3D with certain depths, and then when you move your head, the whole world is locked and it moves with you, and you think you've eaten bad berries and you should go throw up at this point. So that's actually the theory as to why we get motion sickness in VR. So game engine stuff with head tracking works great. All live action VR to date has had this serious problem that you move your head, the whole world is attached to your skull, and it's a very weird conflicting cue. So how would we get all the data that would let us kind of strafe back and forth and move around in the scene as we even move our head, just bobbling it around a little bit is noticeable. Well, what we could do is we could ask all of our friends for their Rico thetas, and we could tile space with Rico thetas all over the place and put one at every possible X, Y, and Z. And at that point, we have a five-dimensional data set. We've recorded the entire Plenoptic function. I've only got a two-dimensional plane right here. I'm going to increase our dynamic range a little bit. There's only so many Rico thetas. In fact, actually, it's on back order on Amazon, unfortunately, possibly because people are trying to do this kind of thing right now. But the issue is, well, first of all, you can only put them every so often because there's only a finite number of cameras. So even if you put them every single inch, you'd still have the problem that you can't generate those views in between. So like here was, just shooting some panoramas going down the hallway. So like maybe one column of those panoramas would look like this. And I'm moving it like maybe 30 centimeters, and there's quite a bit of shift. Now, there's actually 2 points in this line of panoramas which don't change at all and can't change at all because they're seeing along the same ray. Right here, I think, is like directly along the line of motion of the panorama. And that point on the wall is just not going to be able to change color as we move toward it or away from it because it's the same ray of light. That's going to be important in a moment. It could even be a shiny part of the wall and it wouldn't change because we're not changing our angle with respect to it. But it's not a very smooth motion, and so as you move your head around, you'd actually have a little bit of trouble seeing continuous motion as you move your head. So what we need to do somehow is to interpolate between all of these 3D images. And that's something I've been doing since almost the beginning of my professional career in computer graphics when I was an intern at Interval Research Corporation. And this cool guy, Michael Neymark, supervised my internship. He was a media artist, done some very cool installations kind of touching on the ideas of image-based modeling and rendering. And he had tried to, in an image-based way, capture going down a trail in Banff National Forest. And he rigged up this kind of executive baby stroller with a pair of Bolex 16mm cameras with an 8-inch interocular, and it was had an encoder on the wheel, so every time he pushed forward a meter, it would take a stereo pair going down the trail. And working with John Woodfill, a computer vision expert, we'd get these stereo pairs. You could put those into a 3D reconstruction algorithm to get a depth map. Basically, it finds how far a given pixel neighborhood here moved when you get to the other image. And if it didn't move at all, then it's very far away. If it moved more and more between, if the disparity is greater, then it's closer. You can translate that into a point-based depth map, and then you have this point cloud. And now you can actually virtually interpolate between the images or move your head around in the scene. So there were tons of artifacts at the time, but in 1994, this stuff looked pretty cool because you could sort of virtually move yourself left and right through the scene, and you could virtually start to move down the trail. And I think one of the suggestions I had was that since we had all of these panoramas, or all of these stereo images, we should cross-dissolve from one to the next as we go down the trail, and that would start to look realistic. So we could actually do these cross-dissolves and produce the effect of going down. And during this whole time, you would actually have all the information necessary to bob your head around left and right, too, because we have this kind of a non-semantic model of the scene with just enough 3D geometry. So that allows us to move through the scene. And then at SIGGRAPH, the very next year, there was this very interesting paper that was kind of the shot over the bow for the field of image-based modeling and rendering called Plenoptic Modeling from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And what they actually did is they used a video camera to spin around, get panoramas, and they worked out the epipolar geometry to look for corresponding points so that they could cross-dissolve, or they could interpolate or morph between panoramic images here. So they could actually take things that looked like, early proto-versions of Ricoh Theta 360 images, and then... So that allows us to pretend that our lattice of Ricoh Thetas all throughout space, instead of being discrete, maybe we'll just pick one column of them, we can now pretend that it's actually a complete continuum of viewpoints along here. In fact, an entire solid plane of viewpoints, because anywhere we are in between, we can interpolate images that are nearby and produce that viewpoint there. But now if you look at things, things get a little bit odd because, if we were going to shoot video, we'd need all these things here at the same time. You realize they're all getting in each other's way. And that sounds like a problem, but it's actually an indication of the solution already. The fact that all these cameras are in each other's way is very much tied to the fact that they're actually recording quite redundant information, which is that suppose that we're interested in this ray incident upon this camera hitting at this direction. We actually don't need to look up what pixel was in that image in that direction, because we can follow through to our light field camera array here and pick it out of this camera right here. And even if there wasn't a camera right there, we can interpolate it using some estimate of depth or correspondence in order to pick up that same value. So this is totally redundant information, just like this is a really redundant array. To this plane, or it could actually in some cases be a sphere or some other interesting shaped manifold, but it's a two-dimensional manifold. And it is going to encode not the plenoptic function, but the light field. In fact, if we're talking about saying that like the object that we have our light field of, or the scene that we have our light field of is on one side, here, nice object you want to look at, and your observer is over here, then you actually don't even need the other side of cameras here. You just need a whole bunch of fisheyes. And in fact, if the object is small enough and all the cameras are verged on it, you can just use regular rectilinear lenses and shoot your light field that way. But if it's a whole big scene that you want to look around in, then fisheyes turn out to be a good idea. So this is no longer a 5D plenoptic function because we dropped tons of the cameras. We've actually reduced it down a dimension. And this is what we would call a light field. Now, originally, light fields and plenoptic functions were relatively synonymous. There's even a 1936 paper by Gershon et al., which if you translate it from Russian, basically means the light field, and he's taught, or the photic field anyhow. And that basically is trying to say the same thing as the plenoptic function, but then us graphics guys came in there and we kind of renamed everything. And so when we hit SIGGRAPH 96, then light fields meant this four-dimensional reduction of the plenoptic function where it's all shot from a plane. And the parameterization is that like UV says where you are on the plane, right? And this looks like it's only one dimension, but the idea is that it comes out of the screen and it's a whole plane there. And then theta phi is the direction of the incident light upon that point on the plane or the manifold. So SIGGRAPH 96 was the big year for image-based modeling and rendering. The very first session of SIGGRAPH 96 was 4 image-based modeling and rendering papers in a row, including the famous light field rendering paper, a very nice paper on view morphing, which is about morphing in between different points of view, and then 2 other papers that actually had the light field concept embedded within them. But the thing that really is the reason why we call them light fields today is a paper by Lavoie and Hanrahan at SIGGRAPH 96. They started working with synthetically rendered light fields, and that's another way, if you have a computer-generated scene, you can put your digital camera, your virtual camera, anywhere that you want in order to produce the images you need for your light field. And I thought, let's hear in Mark Lavoie's own very voice from his SIGGRAPH 96 video, his explanation of this digital light field that's being viewed.
This videotape demonstrates our real-time viewer for light fields. This light field was constructed from rendered images of a Dragon computer model. We can zoom in, roam around, and at each observer viewpoint, a view with correct perspective and shading is computed by extracting a 2-dimensional slice from the 4-dimensional light field. This visualization shows an entire low-resolution light field. The white pixels indicate which samples are being used to construct the perspective view at the center. As we zoom in, you can see how these samples disperse throughout the array as you would expect.
Okay. So now that's actually the really important thing right here, which is that these are, just a 2D array of renderings. Like, we used to shoot these QuickTime VRs where we'd take something on a turntable, we'd shoot it everywhere around here, everywhere up and down. It should be no surprise that from that 2D array of 2D images that you can show it from any angle up and down and left and right that you need to. But the magic of light fields is that you can actually take a step back from the surface that the cameras saw things from, or step into it and still have all the rays of light recorded in order to synthetically rebin together the rays for the viewpoint that you want. And that rebinning means that actually the final renderings that happen here
Construct the perspective view at the center. As we zoom in, you can see how these samples
are made up of little pieces of the original images that were taken. And then those kind of get composited together to form this virtual perspective. It's like, there's no orthographic lenses that could take an image of all of you with like an ortho camera. But if we actually moved a camera around to all these different positions in front of you, and then just took like the center area of it as we went around, that would construct a view that was effectively infinitely far away. And we could show you with, no lines of perspective. That would be kind of leveraging the light field concept. Now, if you happen to know the basic 3-dimensional geometry of the scene, you can actually interpolate between the images in your light field a lot more effectively than if you don't know the 3D shape of your scene. And 2 of the other papers in that very same session that were presented just a little bit before the light field paper talked about doing that. So the Lumograph by Microsoft Research took like fuzzy objects that would be hard to 3D scan and texture map. And they moved a camera all around. So they actually took like an unstructured set of images and figured out a light field from that. They volumetrically intersected the foreground element of all of this to get like a silhouette-based reconstruction of the shape. And then they used that shape to reconstruct and focus the light field onto. It's basically, that's the shape that if you're trying to figure out the image that's intermediate between this image and this image, you just kind of projection map that image onto the object, you projection map that image onto the object, then you view the object projection map with each one of the images from the center, you cross dissolve between those two, and that produces what that intermediate camera should have seen, and that helps you get the rays of the light field that you need. And in my own PhD thesis, where I was running around taking pictures of buildings from different directions, I was getting upset that I had all of these nice views of what the surfaces of the building looked like that I could reconstruct from photogrammetry. And I didn't just want to pick one view to be the texture map for the front of the building. And I thought, well, if I'm standing in front of the building, I should use the picture that was shot from in front of the building. But if I'm off to the side of the building, I should use an image that was shot from the side. And then little geometric details that aren't in the model will look better, and specular reflections will look better. So this effectively renders this surface here as like a light field surface where your virtual view will cross-dissolve between the available views that were shot of the scene. And in fact, the film that we did for the Computer Animation Festival at SIGGRAPH, we had enough views of the Berkeley Tower from different directions that that's effectively rendered as a light field. And so you can map here, but it actually kind of cross-dissolves between different views of the tower as you move around. And that's part of why the clock never really seems to be one particular time of day, because they were taken at different times of day as a result. So some other things that we might want to shoot light fields might include people, and people you sort of want to shoot all at one moment. When the light field work came out in the 1990s, it was a big deal, but it was a little bit too early to deal with all of the the two-dimensional array of two-dimensional images. It was a lot of data to deal with. So being able to work with that kind of resolution was going to be challenging. So that's why it was only like in the last 5 years that there's been this resurgence of light fields, just like there's been a resurgence of virtual reality, which had some fundamental technological limitations. Even though the ideas were really good 20 years ago, now the hardware's caught up to where some of the thinking was. And one thing that kind of reintroduced the idea of light fields to a lot of people was this particular camera, which I'm holding one of. And we have some representatives from the amazing company, Lytro, that put out this really, really super cool consumer product. But it actually takes a different kind of light field than the one we've been talking about so far. I've been talking about taking, one camera, like a regular camera or a Ricoh Theta, and taking lots of images around here to create the light field. What the Lytro camera does is it actually kind of takes a miniature light field, and a very interesting one. It has a sensor in the back here that's 11 megapixels, and then it has an array of lenslets that basically take a very small light field image of the back of this big lens that's in the front. And if all of these little views of what's going on the back of this lens that's focusing the scene onto you is the data that you get, and it kind of looks something like this on your 11 megapixel sensor, you get all these little light field circles. It actually lets you then selectively choose different mixtures of the rays coming through the lens to form your final image out of. And that's why it's able to refocus an image after the fact, because it can actually choose different rays that would have been focused on different points on the sensor and just pick those particular ones at a certain focal plane. It can also virtually decide to only get a wide aperture or a narrow aperture, and if it's a narrow aperture, it can actually even take it all from one side of the lens or from the other side of the lens. So you can move your viewpoint around with respect to that. And this is from their more advanced hardware, and you can see that even just from the front of the lens of the camera, you can actually get these nice changing focus effects, and you can get some motion parallax happening. It's all just within, an inch or two here, but it's a pretty interesting effect that you can get. A lot of people first heard about light fields through this awesome device, and it's same concepts, same four-dimensional data sets, working at two completely different scales that give you different capabilities. Now, one of the examples here was there's kind of a person. Light fields of people are going to be very interesting. Here you'd probably really want to surround them with cameras if you want to get that person into a virtual environment and be able to then in VR move all around them. Mark Bolas's stop motion demo is pretty cool for stop motion characters to do that. But another issue is how are you going to get that person lit the right way so that they drop into the virtual reality environment? And lighting people the right way so that they'll drop into other environments is something that we've explored a lot through the light stages. And in fact, the very first light stage, the whole paper was written in the same language as light fields, trying to extend the concept of the four-dimensional light field to what we called the eight-dimensional reflectance field, which is the idea that every light field incident upon an object produces a different radiant light field of how it looks under that illumination. And what we did is we built these light stages that would light a person from every direction that light could come from. We called that a reflectance field. It's actually a two-dimensional slice of a full incident light field. And then if you multiply that up against an HDRI map or a light probe, it actually relights that person's face with that illumination. Now, at that point, it took about a minute to record people to get the whole reflectance field. And we were kind of desperate to eventually get some live action, so we gave up for a while on the relightability of the face, and we surrounded our people with color LEDs from all different directions. And then we could take the light from a virtual set rendered out omnidirectionally, or the light from one of our light probe images, and we even put together a little infrared compositing system with a beam splitter so that we could composite people properly lit by one of these incident illumination maps. And by the way, we're having a lot of fun shooting images with the Ricoh Theta and then displaying them as color images in our light stage these days. And that would get this person dropped into the virtual environment with the right illumination, and that's actually finding applications in the visual effects world these days now. But a few years after 2002, we were able to kind of combine the ideas of true light fields and true reflectance fields in the process of building our big light stage 6. And I think we have a number of people who helped make this possible in the audience. Is Sebastian here somewhere? Did he make it back from sushi or anything? Okay, well, hopefully. Anyway, Mark Bolas helped us out with this. He helped us out with everything. But anyway, we built this big one here, and this thing is designed, it can change the lighting really fast so that we can use high-speed cameras and record people lit from every possible direction as they're in motion. And then we were able to borrow 3 high-def cameras, high-speed cameras, to effectively get a light field by slowly spinning our dear Bruce fellow here around. So if you slow it down, we're actually lighting him over and over and over again. Every 30th of a second, we light him with 30 lighting directions to get a reflectance field. And you can see this is him lit from every direction. Those are some time multiplexed matte frames where we turn off the lights on him and we just light up the background. And by having him do a repeating motion and rotating him around on a treadmill, we effectively get a 36 around by 3 up and down light field of him for every frame of his animation. And each one of these data sets is in 30 different lighting conditions, so it's relightable as well. Take Bruce and change the viewpoint on him in post-production. We had to do like a retroreflective treadmill. That was interesting to get that to work. And so here we go. We can drop the background out. We can spin the light around him virtually. We can light him with Grace Cathedral virtually. And we can change the viewpoint because effectively these are all of the camera views that we saw him from. And this is a real-time shader in graphics code written by Charles Felix Chabert, who went on to work at Digital Domain. And in real time, we're changing our viewpoint on him as a true light field, moving in, moving out. So if we want to make it look like he's running across this piazza in Pisa, we can get all the right viewpoints. We can light him with that right light because we had an HDRI map. We can give him a little company if we want to. And from a volumetric intersection of all of his images, we can even compute shadows that that lighting environment would put onto him. And we've taken this a little bit further, not just for Bruce, but actually we're still using Light Stage 6. It's having its 10-year anniversary next month, believe it or not. And we're now doing a really interesting set of interviews with survivors of the Holocaust. And unfortunately, we can't do the time multiplex lighting for relighting stuff. We're getting some static reflectance fields of them. But we're recording linear light fields of people from 30 high-def cameras. So at least for linear motion left and right, we can synthesize any view of them that we need. And then we can generate enough views to run our 3D projector.
How did you survive the Holocaust?
Which we're demonstrating. So you can actually ask the Holocaust survivor a question, and then with our natural language group's voice recognition and question and answer software, it'll play back an appropriate response. And these 216 video projectors are all showing different views of the survivor, all interpolated between the 30 different views that we recorded. And then it's projected on the back of a screen that lets you basically see straight through it horizontally, but it diffuses light vertically, and it produces kind of a nice light fieldish like effect. So the final thing I wanted to show talks about, well, how do we create like an interesting light field video camera that would, you know, shoot video that's great for VR. And so Stanford had a light field imaging symposium in February. I thought it would be, you know, a good thing to sort of give a concept of what a good light field video camera would be. So back in February, I worked with our digital artist, Jay Bush, and a bit of back and forth. We put together this mock-up of about 126 GoPro cameras here. And this would get us all of the rays of light we need that we can interpolate up and then produce any point of view virtually that we needed. Now, this is going to be a lot of work to build that thing, so we thought we could test it out first by shooting it one image at a time. And I realized that basically, since all of those cameras are in the same place up to 2 rotations, if we ask our buddy Greg Downing to get his pan tilt mount that he shoots high-res panoramas all the time at X-res, we could actually intentionally put our camera too far forward and shoot the light field. So this project here, which is sponsored by Otoy, which is now demonstrating and commercializing this technology, and these are in Otoy's awesome offices downtown, we had this camera, and it would go to every position that we need to shoot effectively what would eventually be a video light field. Depending on what mode we're running it in, maybe it takes 2 hours, maybe it takes 10 minutes. We record this spherical light field with all of the rays of light necessary to generate what we need. And the key here is to look out the windows and see that there's parallax of the windows moving back around the buildings across the windows. It's really getting different points of view. And so if you have head tracking, and this is one of the demos that Otoy and Jules and Alyssa ran in the front. And so Jules has actually gone to a lot of trouble to sit in. Has correct head motion parallax. It has correct reflections. The glass actually glints differently and at different depths when you move your head around. You can see the hallway extending down into the environment. And it really makes things look takingly realistic. You not only see what things are, but you can sense what they're made out of based on how the light glints off of them as you move your head around. So with support from Otoy, there was a chance to film a lot of other very interesting light fields around town. So some of those were being shown earlier. And it's still important to think about, okay, what we need to do to create the ultimate light field video camera. Because once all those cameras are really there and they're all generating data, a lot of stuff is going to become a lot more complicated to do. There are really big challenges in not just the acquisition, but in the storage and the compression and the transmission and the decompression. And we're certainly going to need to exploit all 5 dimensions of redundancy, the 4 dimensions of redundancy in the light field, anything that's continuous plus continuity over time. And so hopefully, is anyone going to go and build this light field video camera? Oh my gosh, possibly we'll hear from them later tonight, and we'll get to hear some of these interesting things. So anyway, I think I'm at the end of my time. One thing I didn't talk about, I just want to mention, there's one other use of light fields for VR you should be aware of, which is to display light fields in people's glasses. So as you move your eyes around, you can actually focus on things at different depths. Doug Landman and David Lubke at NVIDIA Research have been working on little light field displays. And if you want your own real, honest-to-goodness light field display, get yourself a dev kit from Leia 3D. It's 260 by 160 of 8 by 8 Hogels, and I think that's, for a lot of people in this room, at least $399 worth of fun. So thank you very much who made this possible, and there's a couple websites. Thank you.